You know, the crazy thing about politics is that there's so many different topics to talk about in the political space. You have the economy, you have welfare and social programs, you have healthcare, you have our foreign and domestic policy. But in doing research for this video, there is just one topic that just keeps coming back up over and over and over again.
Anti-Semitic.
Anti-Semitism.
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 Jew. So for today, we're going to be talking about identity politics. And the two stories that I wanted to hone in on were the event that was hosted by Turning Point USA, AM Fest, and specifically around the speech given by Ben Shapiro. And then I wanted to talk about the clusterfuck that was the release of the Epstein files. But first, let's look at how Ben Shapiro responded to Tucker Carlson and his other contemporaries for interviewing Nick Fuentes.
He knew that Nick Fuentes is an evil troll, and that building him up is an act of moral imbecility. And that is precisely what Tucker Carlson did. He built Nick Fuentes up. And he ought to take responsibility for that, just as he ought to take responsibility for glazing pornographer and alleged sex trafficker Andrew Tate, or for mainstreaming fake historian and pseudo-Nazi apologist Daryl Cooper as America's best and most honest popular historian. Hosts are indeed responsible for the guests they choose and the questions they ask those guests.
What's really crazy about this is to see Ben Shapiro, who famously coined the term "facts don't care about your feelings," pretty much commit the sin of using feelings to argue facts, as Tucker had really pushed back on Nick Fuentes and even outright said that he flat out doesn't agree with the racial critiques that Nick Fuentes brings forth.
He, like me, has always been committed to separating out like foreign policy views from ethnicity, not because, I mean, obviously I'm denounced as an anti-Semite every day. Mm-hmm. So I don't really care what ADL thinks of me, but my Christian faith tells me that there's no such thing as blood guilt, and virtue or sin is not inherited. It's not a feature of DNA. So every person must be assessed individually as God assesses each person individually. And that's like a foundational view. So I always thought it's great to criticize and it's question like our relationship with Israel because it's insane and it hurts us. We get nothing out of it. I completely agree with you there. But the second you're like, well, actually, it's the Jews. First of all, it's against my Christian faith. Like, I just don't believe that and I never will, period.
And he basically goes on to say how this claim of being anti-Semitic was a way to discredit the political opinions by basically saying, you know, you have these extremists attached to your political views. And he gives the example of like how David Duke would hug him whenever he would have a show, because then, you know, people would say that Tucker Carlson has ties to David Duke. And that was the example that Tucker was about to give. But to go back to the topic of the video, the reason why Ben Shapiro's rebuttal to this was really bad is because he's just arguing around these criticisms that people are having. You know, let's take a look at how the world looked at how Israel handled the war in Palestine, for instance. You know, there are a bunch of things that people are really questioning that are coming to light in these recent months.
And what we have to do is we have to secure that part of the base of our support in the United States. That is being challenged systematically. A lot of this is done with money. Money of NGOs, vast. Money of governments, vaster. Okay? We have to fight back. How do we fight back? Our influencers. I think you should also talk to them if you have a chance. To that community. They're very important. And secondly, we're going to have to use the tools of battle. You know, the weapons change over time. You can't fight today with swords. That doesn't work very well, okay? And you can't fight with cavalry. That doesn't work very well. And you have these new things, you know, like drones, things like that. I won't get into that. But we have to fight with the weapons that apply to the battlefields in which we're engaged. And the most important ones are the social media. And the most important purchase that is going on right now is class
Followers.
TikTok. TikTok, number one. And I hope it goes through because it can be consequential.
And, I'll stop myself. Maybe you're getting the impression that I'm about to go into the Alex Jones. But all I am merely trying to say is that this is concerning for someone as me who is not Jewish, because I think Ben and anyone who is defending Israel is actually arguing against these extreme racial critiques that are being brought forth. And to argue around and skirt around this issue is only bringing more scrutiny, as again we are seeing the rise of anti-Semitism and more violent acts happening, and even the rise of the popularity of Nick Fuentes. These are all things that attest to the fact that the way that we are arguing against anti-Semitism and the racial critiques, it is not working. And I've said this before, but in my opinion, this is actually a debate that is up to the government and the people in power who can actually make a change to make a difference. The fact that people are scrutinizing race so heavily right now is, I think, a result of how bad people think that society has gotten. And it is a result of people not thinking that the government is doing enough for them and getting them what they need. Because at the end of the day, what you are actually arguing against is not Nick Fuentes himself, but you are arguing against the people that are continuing to agree with him based on how Ben Shapiro is arguing, by not engaging with these criticisms of, why does AIPAC have to be number one? Why does Israel have to be the number one lobby in the United States? Why do we have to be as involved with them as they are? And to not engage with the moderate perspectives of someone like a Tucker Carlson or a Marjorie Taylor Greene, to not engage with these questions of, did Israel commit a genocide? Should they have gone this far? Why is Netanyahu in America constantly trying to sell us a war or trying to influence influencers, and outright say that he's going to put money into there? These are the things that are making moderate people question our relationship with Israel. And by Ben's argumentation, it just seems like he's looking at everyone who is even questioning this as anti-Semitic. And not only that, his argumentation of, platforming, we had already gone through this debate, and even he had engaged with this debate and defended Joe Rogan for platforming people who were very critical of COVID vaccines and lockdowns.
Meanwhile, I got 11 million people who are listening to Joe Rogan every single episode. Instead of the media asking themselves, why are people listening to Joe Rogan? What can we do differently? Their goal is, how do we deplatform Joe Rogan and make it so that no one else can listen to his stuff and to his guests? Rogan said he will have more guests on the show that present different opinions from contrarian ones right after he hosts controversial guests. He thanked Spotify for their support, said he is a huge Neil Young fan. It was Neil Young who led this off, obviously. He wrote a letter saying they can have Rogan or Young, not both. Okay, but this isn't really about that. This is about a bunch of chicken bleep people at the highest levels of advertising and podcasting who are just cowards. They're just cowards. What they should say is, people who want to listen to Rogan can listen to Rogan. People who don't want to listen to Rogan don't have to listen to Rogan. Shut up and listen to what you like. Like, seriously, do what you want.
So at the end of the day, even if you want to dismantle the factual basis of what Ben is bringing forth here, I think you can also point out that it's very hypocritical to say that Tucker specifically has any responsibility for interviewing these people, because I think at the end of the day, most people want these controversial figures to be interviewed to understand and to know and learn about them and to ultimately make their own decision. But overall, this is bad argumentation from someone like Ben Shapiro, who again was able to immediately exploit this whenever Democrats were doing the same thing a couple of years ago. And overall, that's the main reason that I think this is an important topic to talk about, is because I think that the people that are representing both sides of this argument are only representing the extreme sides in this conversation. And, sometimes in politics lately, within the last few years, we have entered into this kind of zero-sum game where it is all or nothing, and there's no one willing to budge here. And that, again, is the root of this issue. I think there's a true conversation to have as far as the strength of AIPAC in the country, and maybe, what's the problem with them being the third or fourth or wherever they organically fall into line here, instead of some manufactured first place that is artificially, propagated by the government and also by the Israeli government and our relationship with them. But it'll be interesting to see how this story develops and where the ongoing conversation goes. Like I said, my prediction is I think that this is an interesting topic to follow, because I think that in the upcoming election, the next presidential election, this will be an issue that will be brought up about. But the next topic I wanted to go into was the release of the Epstein files. And this has just been a huge clusterfuck from no matter how you look at it, as we had gone from we have the Epstein files to the files are on Pam Bondi's desk to the victims have to be protected to Pam Bondi's dog has eaten the Epstein files and has shat out 100 redacted pages of the Epstein files. Like, I'm not even exaggerating. This has just been an enormous display of how corrupt the government is. And, this has been an ongoing talk in conspiracy theories for as long as I can remember about how the government is constantly hiding things.
So the media then misrepresented and said, oh, look at 4chan. They're talking about a thing called Pizzagate in some pizza place in D.C. And the media looks at it and says, oh, Alex Jones is claiming all this bad stuff's happening at this pizza place. I'm like, what is this? So they divert to some probably innocent pizza place to distract off of all the emails that the New York police have and the FBI have. That's just this monstrous reported pedophile network. So to discredit that, they go create a fake story, hoping we jump on it to then divert over to that story. And then once we're on that, it diverts everybody off from Anthony Weiner. What?
This has illustrated nothing but proving the fact that these were not conspiracy theories, because you had these files that were also uploaded and then subsequently removed afterwards, and you can verify these by double checking online. And CoffeeZilla actually made a really good video about this, and I would really recommend you watch that if you haven't yet. But it was just crazy to see the stuff that they've removed, and the fact that we knew so much about who was involved with this and had made no prosecution or had made any moves towards putting any of these people in jail. It is just absolutely insane, the degree to which it seems like we have just been letting this go on perceivably, because we just have so much information about the people that were involved. And, Trump had made such a big stink about protecting the identity of the people involved, but the only person that seems to be really protected here is him. And I don't want to outright accuse him of doing anything, being involved with anything serious yet, as that hasn't been outright proven through evidence, but it just doesn't look good. And even just the fact that there is so much of these files, and Trump and his administration did so much to obfuscate it. Even him in an interview earlier this year asking why everyone is still talking about Jeffrey Epstein. It's just entirely gross and just really paints I don't think you can look at the delay of the release of the Epstein files as anything other than stalling at this point, because just the nature and the amount of mess ups that have been happening, it just seems like now that they're scrambling to meet the required restrictions that were put forth in the bill by Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna. And overall, a big theme with this channel is the fact that, we as citizens rarely have a way to check the people in power. And ultimately, this is a time where, we are seeing not only corruption in the U.S. government, but even worldwide, with protests breaking out all over. So this story will be really interesting to see, what will come up out of this and what will change not only in our political system, but maybe even worldwide, as this is an international, sex trafficking ring, as we saw even people in England, the Prince of England was implicated in this. So it'll be interesting to see the degree to, who else was involved, if people will be impeached, as there was discussions around Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, who were basically even now looking at their interviews, were lying and committing perjury under oath in regards to the Epstein files. But this is just crazy. It's absolutely insane. The degree to which we're seeing how corrupt the government is. And I think this will be a real turning point in the amount of things that people will be willing to tolerate, because it would be an entirely different thing if the government was working as intended. But I think if anything, people are noticing a decline in the government and also the conditions around America and the living conditions that we're facing. And I think that will this be the straw that breaks the camel's back as far as enacting some kind of big change? Who knows? Like, that's the crazy thing, and why I think this is such an interesting time, and why this topic specifically is a really interesting topic to be following. But whether you agree or disagree, please consider leaving a comment, because one of the reasons I want to make these videos is to just have a place to talk about all the crazy stuff that's going on in the world. And if you can kind of zoom out and not take it as seriously, I think we're seeing a lot of big changes in our political system and in society. So that's really what I find fascinating about all of it. But if you've made it this far, have a Merry Christmas or a Happy Holidays and a Happy Hanukkah. But please take care and be safe.